What kind of movie becomes a cultural obsession before audiences even see a single frame? Long before trailers flooded television and social media campaigns dominated entertainment, Gone with the Wind had already become the most talked about production in Hollywood history. The film wasn't simply another major release. It was an event, a spectacle, and for many people in America, almost a national obsession. By the time the movie finally reached theaters in 1939, audiences already knew stories about the chaos happening behind the cameras. Rumors spread through newspapers, radio broadcasts, and Hollywood gossip columns. Some people believed the film would become the greatest movie ever made. Others predicted it would collapse into one of the most expensive disasters the industry had ever seen. Nobody seemed neutral about it. The production itself felt almost cursed from the beginning. Studios poured enormous amounts of money into the project at a time when Hollywood was still recovering from the Great Depression. Every decision became controversial. Every casting rumor created headlines. And behind closed doors, arguments exploded daily between producers, writers, directors, and actors. The film starred Vivien Leigh as Scarlett O'Hara, Clark Gable as Rhett Butler, Olivia de Havilland as Melanie Hamilton, Hattie McDaniel as Mammy, and Leslie Howard as Ashley Wilkes. But behind those legendary performances existed a production so chaotic that many insiders doubted the movie would ever even be completed. One of the strangest moments happened before Scarlett O'Hara had even been cast. In December 1938, producers decided to film the gigantic burning of Atlanta sequence first. It was one of the most ambitious scenes ever attempted in Hollywood at that time. Massive sets representing old Southern buildings were prepared for destruction, and many of them were actually leftovers from older films sitting unused on studio property. Then the fires began. Towering flames lit up the California night sky while thick black smoke rolled over the studio lot. Fire crews stood nearby as cameras captured the destruction from multiple angles. The heat became so intense that people watching from a distance reportedly believed an actual catastrophe was unfolding in Hollywood. Can you imagine seeing an entire city burning before the movie's main actress had even been hired? That's exactly what happened. During filming, a temporary stand-in appeared in Scarlett's costume because the real Scarlett O'Hara still didn't exist. Producers were desperately searching for the perfect actress while simultaneously shooting one of the biggest scenes in cinematic history. The pressure surrounding the casting had become overwhelming. The search for Scarlett soon turned into a nationwide obsession unlike anything Hollywood had experienced before. Reports claimed that more than 1,400 women were considered for the role. Young actresses traveled across America hoping to become the face of the generation's biggest film. Every major studio star wanted the opportunity. Newspapers constantly speculated about who would win. Hollywood insiders insisted only an American actress could properly capture the spirit of a Southern belle. Many believed audiences would reject anyone who sounded foreign or unfamiliar. Yet while producers debated endlessly, Vivien Leigh quietly arrived in Hollywood already convinced the role belonged to her. When producer David O. Selznick first met Leigh during the filming of the burning of Atlanta sequence, witnesses later described the moment almost like fate. Leigh reportedly stood calmly among the firelight and chaos while everyone else panicked around her. Selznick immediately sensed something extraordinary. What must it feel like to walk into Hollywood as an outsider and somehow know you were born for the biggest role in cinema? At the time, many people doubted Leigh. Critics argued she looked too refined, too elegant, and most importantly, too British. But once cameras rolled, nearly everyone recognized something remarkable. She transformed Scarlett O'Hara into a character audiences could admire, despise, pity, and love all at once. Not everyone accepted defeat gracefully. Katharine Hepburn openly campaigned for the role and confidently told people she was perfect for Scarlett. Hepburn already carried a reputation for intelligence and fierce independence, qualities she believed matched the character perfectly. But Selznick wasn't convinced. By that point, Hepburn had also developed another dangerous reputation in Hollywood: box office poison. Several of her recent films had failed financially, making studios nervous about investing millions in her. Selznick privately questioned whether audiences would believe Rhett Butler could remain obsessed with Hepburn's Scarlett for years. Hepburn refused to perform a screen test because she believed her talent already spoke for itself. Imagine losing the biggest role of your career because you were too confident to audition. Meanwhile, Clark Gable faced his own fears about joining the film. Although he was already considered the king of Hollywood, even Gable worried about audience expectations. Fans of the original novel were intensely protective of Rhett Butler, and many believed no actor could fully satisfy them. But one specific scene nearly pushed Gable to abandon the role entirely. During production, Rhett Butler was supposed to break down emotionally after Scarlett suffers a miscarriage. Gable hated the idea. For years he had carefully maintained his image as Hollywood's ultimate masculine leading man. Tough, fearless, confident, those qualities defined his career. Crying on screen threatened that image. Today audiences often celebrate emotional vulnerability in male characters. But in the 1930s, studios feared audiences might see emotional men as weak. Would moviegoers still admire Rhett Butler if he openly showed grief? To solve the argument, filmmakers shot the scene twice. In one version, Gable emotionally reacts to Scarlett's suffering. In the second version, he hides his face from the camera, avoiding visible emotion entirely. After reviewing the footage, even Gable admitted the emotional performance felt more powerful and human. The vulnerable version remained in the final film, helping create one of the movie's most memorable emotional moments. Then came another scene that sparked controversy across America, the infamous staircase sequence. In the scene, Rhett carries Scarlett upstairs as the screen fades to black, leaving audiences to interpret what follows. Even in 1939, censorship officials fiercely debated whether the moment implied marital assault. Some believed the sequence crossed moral boundaries Hollywood should never approach. Others argued it represented passion, reconciliation, and emotional complexity between two deeply flawed people. More than 80 years later, viewers still debate the scene. Some see romance. Others see manipulation and violence. Many see both simultaneously. Isn't it remarkable how certain films evolve depending on the generation watching them? Off-screen realities created even more controversy. Although Vivien Leigh carried most of the nearly 4-hour movie and spent roughly 125 exhausting days filming, she earned far less money than Clark Gable. The salary imbalance reflected the harsh realities of Hollywood during that era. Fame mattered more than workload. Gable's star power guaranteed enormous profits for studios, while Leigh, despite delivering the performance of her lifetime, remained treated as a newcomer who should simply feel grateful for the opportunity. Long filming schedules pushed actors toward exhaustion. Temperatures under studio lights became unbearable, especially while filming in heavy costumes. Leigh reportedly smoked constantly between scenes to manage stress, while arguments between directors and producers erupted almost daily around the cast. And the directors themselves became another disaster. Several directors worked on the film during different stages of production. George Cukor originally directed much of the early work before suddenly being removed. Official explanations blamed scheduling and creative differences, but rumors quickly spread throughout Hollywood. Some reports claimed Gable disliked Cukor's directing style. Others believed producers panicked over slow production schedules. Whatever the truth was, replacing a director during such a massive production only increased tensions behind the scenes. Eventually Victor Fleming took over much of the project. Yet even Fleming became overwhelmed by exhaustion and stress at certain points, temporarily stepping away during production. How chaotic must a production become when even the directors can barely survive it? Meanwhile, Leslie Howard reportedly disliked portraying Ashley Wilkes. He considered Ashley weak, passive, and dull compared to the film's more dynamic personalities. Howard mainly accepted the role because Selznick promised him opportunities to work on projects he genuinely cared about later. Even Gable initially hesitated about playing Rhett Butler. The expectations felt terrifying. Fans of the novel already imagined Rhett perfectly in their minds, meaning failure seemed almost unavoidable. Financial pressures and studio negotiations eventually convinced him to commit. Then there was Margaret Mitchell herself, the author whose best-selling novel inspired the entire phenomenon. Surprisingly, Mitchell kept her distance from most of the production chaos. After selling the rights to her novel, she avoided becoming deeply involved in Hollywood politics and casting battles. When people constantly asked who should play Rhett Butler, Mitchell jokingly suggested Groucho Marx. The comment revealed something fascinating about Mitchell. While Hollywood treated the production like a life-or-death mission, she sometimes seemed amused by the frenzy surrounding it. Behind closed doors, the screenplay itself became another nightmare. Roughly 16 writers reportedly contributed material during different stages of development. Scenes were constantly rewritten, dialogue changed daily, and actors occasionally received new pages moments before cameras rolled. The confusion became so extreme that nobody seemed entirely certain which version of the script was final. Among the writers was F. Scott Fitzgerald, one of America's most famous literary figures. Fitzgerald contributed work to the screenplay but ultimately received no official screen credit. His involvement became another strange footnote in a production already overflowing with drama and creative conflict. Yet somehow, despite every argument, delay, controversy, and disaster, the movie survived. And when Gone with the Wind finally premiered, the reaction stunned Hollywood. Audiences lined up around entire city blocks hours before showtime. Some theaters stayed open deep into the night because crowds refused to leave. In major cities, screenings became enormous public events complete with searchlights, formal dress, live orchestras, and newspaper coverage that made the film feel less like entertainment and more like history unfolding in real time. Families returned again and again, bringing friends just to witness the emotional experience one more time. The movie didn't merely succeed. It exploded into a cultural phenomenon unlike anything the film industry had ever seen before. But perhaps the most fascinating question still lingers decades later. Would the film have become so legendary without the chaos surrounding its creation? Sometimes masterpieces are born from harmony and careful planning. But sometimes unforgettable art emerges from absolute disorder, from exhaustion, panic, and people desperately trying to stop an entire production from collapsing. The making of Gone with the Wind was never elegant or controlled. It was stressful, unpredictable, controversial, and at times almost completely unmanageable. And maybe that tension is exactly what audiences still feel when they watch it today. Behind the glamorous costumes and sweeping romance stood a production that constantly seemed on the verge of disaster. Producer David O. Selznick became obsessed with creating the greatest motion picture Hollywood had ever seen. That obsession pushed everyone around him to their limits. Scripts changed constantly. Entire scenes were rewritten overnight. Actors feared replacement. Crew members worked under relentless pressure while rumors spread daily about new problems behind the scenes. At one point, screenwriter Ben Hecht was reportedly pulled into an emergency rewriting session so intense that it became part of Hollywood legend. According to many accounts, Selznick and director Victor Fleming practically isolated Hecht while demanding rapid revisions to rescue the screenplay during production. The pressure was overwhelming because filming had already begun, money was disappearing rapidly, and the studio needed answers immediately. Imagine trying to rewrite one of the most anticipated films in history while cameras, actors, and millions of dollars waited for your next page. Would most productions survive that kind of chaos today? The director's situation only made matters worse. George Cukor originally spent years preparing the movie. He carefully developed the characters, studied the novel in detail, and worked extensively with the cast. Many actors admired his attention to emotional realism, especially Vivien Leigh, who felt Cukor deeply understood Scarlett O'Hara's complicated personality. Then suddenly, after only a short period of filming, he was gone. Official explanations varied, but rumors spread across Hollywood immediately. Some believed there were creative disagreements. Others claimed tensions with Clark Gable played a role. Whatever the truth may have been, the firing shocked the cast and crew. In the middle of producing the most expensive movie of its era, the studio replaced its director and hoped nobody would notice the instability. Victor Fleming stepped in to take control, bringing a very different energy to the production. Where Cukor focused heavily on emotional nuance, Fleming pushed for speed, scale, and intensity. Under his direction, the film grew more physically exhausting. Days became longer. Pressure increased. Tempers reportedly flared across the set as everyone struggled to keep up with the impossible demands. But even Fleming eventually began breaking under the strain. The workload became so overwhelming that he reportedly suffered physical exhaustion and temporarily left the production to recover. During that period, director Sam Wood stepped in to continue filming while the studio scrambled to maintain progress. 3 directors. Endless rewrites. More than a dozen writers contributing material. Constant interference from executives. Yet somehow, against every expectation, the finished movie felt seamless. That alone almost seems impossible. Then there was the money. The production cost nearly $4 million, an astonishing amount during the late 1930s when most studios considered such spending almost reckless. Hollywood executives feared the film could financially destroy the studio if audiences rejected it. Every additional delay increased anxiety. Every rewritten scene added more expenses. Every technical problem created new panic. And there were many technical problems. Technicolor filmmaking was still relatively new at the time, and shooting in color demanded enormous amounts of light, equipment, and precision. Cameras were massive. Sets became unbearably hot under powerful studio lamps. Makeup had to be adjusted constantly because certain shades appeared completely different on film. Even something as simple as eye color became a production challenge. Scarlett O'Hara was famously described in the novel as having striking green eyes, but Vivien Leigh's eyes were naturally blue-gray. Instead of ignoring the issue, the filmmakers became obsessed with preserving the character exactly as readers imagined her. Makeup artists experimented endlessly while cinematographers manipulated lighting and color tones to create the illusion audiences expected. Can you imagine a modern studio spending enormous amounts of time and money simply because readers might complain about eye color accuracy? That level of obsession defined nearly every aspect of the production. One of the most spectacular sequences involved the burning of Atlanta. Selznick reportedly rented nearly every available Technicolor camera in Hollywood just to capture the destruction from multiple angles. Massive flames consumed old movie sets while smoke filled the sky above the studio lot. Crew members understood they had only one chance to film the scene correctly because entire structures were literally being destroyed during production. The result became one of the most visually unforgettable moments in cinema history. And still, the problems never stopped. Censorship battles created another major crisis. Hollywood in the 1930s operated under strict moral guidelines known as the Production Code, which controlled language, sexuality, and controversial content in films. One particular line from the script alarmed censorship officials immediately. "Frankly, my dear, I don't give a damn." Today, the sentence sounds almost harmless. But in 1939, the word damn triggered outrage among censorship authorities who believed the line violated acceptable standards of public decency. Studio executives debated whether removing the word would ruin the emotional power of the ending. Selznick refused to surrender easily. Lengthy negotiations followed as producers argued the line was essential to the story and already famous among readers of the original novel. Eventually, permission was granted, though not without controversy. Ironically, the debate only increased public curiosity about the film. How often does censorship accidentally create even greater publicity? Meanwhile, the glamorous romance audiences adored on screen reportedly felt far less glamorous behind the scenes. Clark Gable remained one of Hollywood's biggest stars, admired for his confidence and masculine charm. But reality on set was far more complicated. Years of smoking and dental problems had reportedly forced Gable to wear dentures, and Vivien Leigh later admitted that filming intimate scenes with him was not nearly as romantic as moviegoers imagined. Hollywood has always specialized in illusion. That contrast between fantasy and reality existed everywhere during production. Beneath the beautiful costumes stood exhausted actors working endless hours. Beneath the elegant southern mansions stood enormous technical crews struggling with heat, lighting, and pressure. Beneath the sweeping romance stood a studio terrified the entire project might fail. And yet audiences never saw the panic. When the film finally premiered in Atlanta in December 1939, the event resembled a national celebration more than a movie opening. Huge crowds packed the streets for parades and public festivities. Politicians attended ceremonies. Newspapers covered the premiere like a historic political event rather than entertainment news. For a brief moment, Hollywood stopped feeling separate from American identity. The movie became something larger, a symbol of national culture during a period when the world itself seemed increasingly unstable. That timing mattered enormously. America was still recovering emotionally from the Great Depression while Europe moved closer to the horrors of World War II. Audiences watching Scarlett O'Hara lose everything and still fight to survive connected deeply with her determination. Her final words, "Tomorrow is another day," carried emotional weight far beyond the fictional story itself. For struggling viewers, the line felt hopeful. For audiences in Britain during wartime, the message became even more powerful. Cities were being bombed. Families were losing homes and loved ones. Watching Scarlett rebuild her life after devastation resonated with people experiencing fear and uncertainty in the real world. Could anyone involved in the production have predicted that one line would inspire audiences facing actual global catastrophe? But no discussion of Gone with the Wind can ignore the controversy surrounding race and the film's portrayal of the American South. Even before the premiere, civil rights organizations warned that the story romanticized the Confederacy and softened the brutal realities of slavery. Critics argued the film presented an idealized vision of plantation life while avoiding deeper truths about oppression and racial violence. Some offensive language was removed before release, but many concerns remained unresolved. Those debates never truly disappeared. In later decades, historians, critics, and audiences repeatedly returned to the same uncomfortable questions. Should a film be celebrated for artistic achievement if its historical portrayal is deeply flawed? Can audiences admire performances and filmmaking while still criticizing harmful representations? In 2020, those debates intensified again when the movie temporarily disappeared from streaming platforms before later returning with historical context attached. What does it say about a film when every generation continues arguing about its meaning? Perhaps no individual embodied those contradictions more painfully than Hattie McDaniel. Her performance as Mammy became one of the most memorable parts of the film, earning widespread praise from critics and audiences alike. Then, at the 1940 Academy Awards, McDaniel achieved something no African-American performer had accomplished before. She won an Oscar. It should have been a pure moment of triumph. Instead, segregation overshadowed the victory. The ceremony took place at a hotel that normally prohibited black guests entirely. Special arrangements reportedly had to be made simply for McDaniel to attend. Even then, she was forced to sit separately from her co-stars at a distant table near the back of the room. Think about the contradiction for a moment. Hollywood celebrated her talent enough to hand her the industry's highest honor, yet the same industry still refused to treat her as equal socially. When McDaniel's name was announced, she walked to the stage with extraordinary dignity and composure. Her acceptance speech became one of the most historic moments in Academy Awards history. Millions understood they were witnessing something groundbreaking. Yet after the ceremony ended, another painful reality emerged. Some post-award celebrations reportedly took place at locations where black guests were still unwelcome. The contrast was impossible to ignore. Gone with the Wind represented both the brilliance and the failures of Hollywood at the exact same time. It showcased extraordinary filmmaking while also reflecting deep social inequalities. It delivered emotional storytelling while generating painful historical debate. It became glamorous, influential, beloved, criticized, groundbreaking, and controversial all at once. Maybe that complexity explains why the film still fascinates people generations later. Because the story behind Gone with the Wind is ultimately bigger than one movie. It is a story about ambition so enormous it nearly destroyed the people involved. A story about artists chasing perfection through exhaustion and chaos. A story about Hollywood's ability to create breathtaking magic while simultaneously exposing its deepest flaws. And perhaps that is why audiences still cannot stop talking about it. Not because the production was perfect, but because it never was.